He's gone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
It would not.
Why do you think, like, if I got 3 people to write down what I'm saying,
dictated.
and I
Also,
said,
like you just happen that an amanuensis is the same material that is found in Evangeline, and the material that's not found in Evangeline just isn't the part that the amanuensis wrote. It just happened that way. Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? And then all of Acts never an amanuensis. Yeah, it's kind of strange.
yeah. Well, anyway, my main argument was actually before all the Marxian stuff was going to be that I actually think that the New Testament, it was written within the first century, and I know you disagree with that.
Definitely no evidence of that.
Well, the thing is that we do have. I think the evidence would be the fact that people like the church fathers, which I know you don't listen to, but like people like the church fathers, they do seem to be quoting earlier sources, and they're not. I don't think they're quoting Mark.
Irenaeus is the only one who really starts giving us names of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he starts claiming that they're earlier, but we don't have shit to prove that. I mean, I'm sorry, man. Like, we literally do not have anything that goes prior to 144.
Well, we do have P52, which is 100 to 170.
Nope. P52, I'll show it right here. P52, hopefully this is working here. Hopefully it does. Maybe? No, that's the fucking TikTok live thing. Let me see here. Will that work? No, I don't know if it's going to work or not. So P52, unfortunately, also known as P457, that is actually a text that shows up in... here he goes. There it is. This is the John Rylands Research Institute and Library at the University of Manchester, where it is housed. P52... All right. Widely regarded as the earliest portion of any New Testament writing ever found, it provides us with the invaluable evidence on the spread of Christianity in the provinces of the Roman Empire in the first centuries of our era. The first editor dated the fragment to the first half of the second century, which is what you're talking about, between 100 to 150. The date was estimated paleographically by comparing the handwriting with other manuscripts. Recent research points to a date near to 200, but there is as yet no convincing evidence that any earlier fragments from the New Testament survive. Your argument would have made sense about maybe 10 to 15 years ago. It doesn't make sense anymore.
And that's because we don't have any other surviving pieces? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's because the recent research points to a date near to 200. This is from the actual University of Manchester, the John Rylands Research Institute and Library, where P52 is housed. They say it is the earliest fragment. You are correct there, but it dates to 200. So that does not help us get anywhere closer to anything being written prior to 144. In fact, it actually makes a lot more sense that the first fragment that we have of John shows up about maybe 20, 30 years after John is written, as opposed to 100. So, yeah. Nope. P52 is not a good argument that anything was written prior to 144. I mean, technically, I respect the fact that you even knew about it. A lot of people don't know about it. But P52 does not date to that anymore. Again, it would have, what you just said would make a killer argument about 2 decades ago, maybe a decade, but not anymore because of recent research. And unfortunately, you're finding out that it's dated to 200 before a lot of other people do, because they rely on these scholars who keep regurgitating the same bullshit from the same first editor. I mean, it literally tells us that the first person who came out with information on it dated it to the first half of the first century, or sorry, the second century, between 100 and 150, and people keep latching on to that because the scholars just kept repeating that. And unfortunately, we've got a whole bunch of apologetics bullshitters out there who keep saying that thing and not updating their information. The updated information, their recent research points to a date nearer to 200. They don't update their shit because they like the idea that it's from the early second century, because that way it sounds more legit. That way you can beat the arguments from people who bring up Marcion. I hear on a daily basis that in my DMs and stuff like that, the P52 dates before Marcion. No, it doesn't. It kind of sounds like it does if you listen to apologetics, but if you actually keep up with the research, because things, more information comes out and we update things, like actual scientists update things, not just scholars that give their opinion. Yeah, you find out that this is built on a house of cards, man.
Well, what about people like First Clement, who about
First
80,
Clement.
96?
First Clement is dated to 96 because the opening line says recent tragedies and hindrances that have befallen us, and that line does not actually indicate anything about the 90s. In fact, that is just a weird conjecture because they try to say that that's the persecution under the reign of Domitian, but Domitian didn't punish the Jews, he didn't persecute the Christians. He just persecuted the Jews in the 90s. We don't have any evidence that he had any knowledge of the Christians or anything like that, or any idea or any concern about the Christians. None whatsoever. It's just a later Christian claim. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't work. Not only that, but it doesn't mention Clement anywhere in the text, so it shouldn't have to date to the lifetime of Clement, who's said to have died in like 99 to 100. On top of that, even if Clement did write it, well, unfortunately, the first time we get any mention of it is yet again Irenaeus in 180, or Hegesippus in 180. And by the way, the Shepherd of Hermas, which according to the Muratorian canon at the end of the 2nd century, says that it was written, the Shepherd of Hermas, was written by the brother of Pope Pius, which would mean it's written in the middle of the 2nd century. And in that text, in Shepherd of Hermas, the author says, I tasked Clement with delivering a letter for me, which means Clement must have been alive in the middle of the 2nd century.
Well, there's different. As far as I know, I think there actually is different Clements. But
well, as far as we know, that's the same one because it was still the Clement in Rome. In fact, if you look up the Wikipedia, it tells you that that's most likely the same one because that's what scholars believe. But nevertheless, it doesn't really matter because it never. But it never even says. Yeah, I know. But the only reason that it says 95, it doesn't say anything about 95 in the text. They only say it is because of a later Christian claim that they were persecuted by the Domitian, Emperor Domitian in the 90s, even though there's no evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, multiple scholars actually took this down, which is why scholar M. David Litva here recently, who has done work and has actually cited me and my co-author, he has actually cited us on our stilometer stuff and reached out to us for this purpose. He actually says that First Clement came out in like the 170s or so, or is written in the 150s and could not be written by Clement. And again, it doesn't say anything in there about being written by Clement.
Well, I think the problem there would be is that you're now putting the burden of proof on the majority's consensus and saying that we're right.
I don't care. I don't give a single solitary fuck about the majority, dude. I give a shit about the evidence, and the fact that they don't have any evidence to suggest that it's written in 90 means that I can wipe my ass with their claim that it says that it's written in 90. I don't care at all.
And your positive evidence that Clement was written at a later date would be what?
Even my positive evidence is if it was written by Clement, Clement is mentioned in the Shepherd of Hermas, which is dated to the middle of the 2nd century by the Christians themselves, by the way. Also, again, even if I don't have any positive evidence that it's written after 144, you don't have any positive evidence that it was written before. So it's moot, and you have to move on to your next point.
Well, except for the fact that that would be the early consensus. But anyway, I
don't give two flying fucks if that's the early consensus. And also, that's not when Irenaeus says that it was written. So no, that's not the early consensus. That's the consensus today from people who don't just want to accept the fact that we don't have any evidence for things.
Well, even if you throw out First Clement, we do have Polycarp, who says Paul wrote a letter to the Philippians.
Cool. When was Polycarp writing?
Polycarp was writing around the early to mid, so like 110 to 117. Other parts are dated to 135, it looks like here.
Yeah, no. So we don't have any evidence that Polycarp was writing that early. In fact, it wouldn't make a lot of sense that he would be, because Irenaeus he claims that Polycarp was his teacher, and if Polycarp was writing that early, that wouldn't make a lot of sense, because what you'd end up with there, Irenaeus was born in 130s, so he had to have been writing later. In fact, the earliest dates for Polycarp's death is in the 160s, anywhere from 150 to 160s. 167 is the latest date.
Wait, why doesn't it make sense? He writes a letter in 110.
He does not write a letter in 110. He doesn't give any evidence that it's from 110. In fact, Polycarp is dated because of Ignatius. And Ignatius, because he has a letter that is used as the opening to Ignatius's letters, like the short recension. And the short recension of Ignatius, according to M. David Litva, is 170s.
Well, it actually says here that Ignatius died between 98 to 117 AD.
Nope, that is just something from Eusebius, who is an admitted liar, and we don't have any evidence of that. In fact, there are multiple historians who say that he lives into the 160s, and some scholars who identify Ignatius as a Peregrinus Proteus who died in 165 at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games by setting himself on fire, which is hence the name Ignatius. But that being said, there's no evidence whatsoever that he was actually writing at the beginning of the first century. That is from Eusebius, an admitted liar in the 4th century who was commissioned by Constantine to write a history of the church, who said that he died around 108 to 110. But no historian who doesn't just take Eusebius' word for it places Ignatius' death around that time. So no, there's no evidence whatsoever that Ignatius was writing that earlier, and no evidence, therefore, that Polycarp was writing that earlier. In fact, it makes a lot more sense if Irenaeus is saying that Polycarp was his teacher, and Irenaeus was writing in 180 and was born in 130, that Polycarp would die somewhere in the 150s to 160s, which is the earliest estimates from the church.
So it kind of sounds to me like if anybody gives you some evidence from
Yeah,
this
I
early
just wipe
on,
my ass with anything that doesn't have any evidence behind it. That's how that works. Do you have anything else?
well, I would admit that Eusebius can make some mistakes, but I don't
Yeah,
think.
well, he admits that he's an admitted
flat-out-
liar, and even says that he even quotes Plato and says that when Plato talks about a lawyer lying for the advancement of his client, Eusebius compares that to lying for the advancement of the church and trying to compel people to do something out of compulsion as opposed to like forcing them to do it. So in other words, using something that is false to make people believe in doing the right thing. Says this in a Preporto Evangelica, his book in about 320.
So what would you say about people like, well, you do have Josephus, but you don't. You dismiss. Do you
Testimonium
dismiss
Flavianum comes from Eusebius. Eusebius in Demonstratio Evangelica says, "Let us now make use of Josephus the Jew," and for the first time in Christian history gives us that paragraph, and it includes the portions that even Christian scholars today say must have been interpolated.
And for Pliny the Younger, what would you say?
Pliny the Younger doesn't say anything about Jesus. He says Christ, doesn't say that they worship a man, doesn't find any connection with Judea or the Jews or anything like that, and shows a general lack of information when it comes to the Christian belief.
So you would dismiss somebody writing about Christ or Christus, however you want to put it, and say that it's definitely not talking about the Christians who worship.
Are you aware that Christ is a title? It means anointed, and it applied to different people and to different gods prior to that. So I don't give two flying fucks.
Okay. What about Tacitus?
Tacitus, we can actually tell as well, is interpolated into with the line about crisis, because again, crisis would not be the word that they actually put down on the arrest record or crucifixion record, which Tacitus would have used because he was a former senator who had access to the Roman archives and Senate records and was utilizing things like arrest records and crucifixion records, or should have been, for the arrest or crucifixion of Jesus. And he would have said Jesus, or the Greek or Latin variant, not Christ. On top of that, he calls Pontius Pilate a procurator when Judea didn't even have a procurator until the decade after Pilate was dismissed in 36. Pilate was a prefect. We know this from the Pilate stone, which dates to his lifetime under Tiberius. On top of that, he uses the word Christian, and the word Christian appears in a Latin inscription found in Rome called CILVI 24944 that dates between 16 BCE and 37 CE, so supposedly or potentially before the supposed birth of Jesus. So now.
Well, one last thing. I
Yep.
would like I do want to know where you're getting your sources from. That was my last question.
Tacitus' Annals, written in 116, Book 15, Chapter 44. The oldest manuscript we have is from the 11th century, and we can see where the Christians are actually erasing the E to make it look like I and put the word Christians with an I in the margins, which is what ends up showing up in the 12th, 13th, and 14th century manuscripts of Tacitus.
No, I mean, like for everything we've talked about so far, I would like to know where you've gotten your like information and stuff from.
Well, you're in luck that in fact there's a compilation of a whole bunch of different things. You can either check out my book, Christ Before Jesus. The ebook is just $3, or you can take a look at a website created by one of my friends in the chat. His name is Great Eyes, and that website is, let's see if we pull it up. Here we go. It is mythicism.web.app, and you can actually take a look at just about everything that you could possibly be coming up with. Thales, Phlegon, Paul, Josephus. Here we go. I think Phlegon's over here. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different things. All this different shit that you keep bringing up and stuff like that, like Polycarp and blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Here's those dates, 155 to 167. There's all these different things that we have with receipts and all kinds of information. It's a great resource. You can check that out. It is free. The ebook is $3 for my book that has further citations and references and stuff like that. But if you want something quick and free, you can check out the website. It is mythicism.web.app.
Okay, and it lists on the website. It lists like y'all's actual like where we got this from, sources.
Yep. Anything else? He's gone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Thank you to anybody and everybody who stuck around longer than 30 seconds. 35-second gang, rise up. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. Peace out, Girl Scout. Put me down for some Thin Mints. Also, there's YouTube. So see you guys later.